Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
I need to go home, Minnie answered after a while. She was shaking with fear. Shall we go for a walk, the neighbor suggests, and Minnie stops understanding what's going on. To the store and back. No. I want to talk about my brother, the guy clarified. What's between you? He led her into a corner not visible from any window and tried to speak softly. Nothing. Strange nothing, he laughed. But since you say so, I'll believe it. By the way, I remember you as a little girl. You've blossomed now, you've gotten prettier. His face is somehow too close, and Minnie doesn't like it, so she pulls back. Well, what about you? Perry pulls her toward him, and it's not clear what repels her more, the cigarette smoke or the guy himself. Let go, Minnie almost yells, and he complies. I meant no harm, he warns her. Perry, calls out Anthony, clearly hearing Minnie's voice. Coming, he gives the girl a look and leaves, and she hurries home. One thing Minnie realized is that though the brothers look the same, she feels differently about them. As she pressed against Anthony, she realized that it was not in vain, her heart fluttered. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the closeness, absorbed him, felt his strong hands squeezing her shoulder blades. She hadn't known him long, but seemed to have known him all her life. Perry was different, the only thing she wanted to get away from was him. She came home, her mother didn't ask her anything. And from the next day life went on as usual, boring, where breakfast, lunch, and dinner alternated with chores in between. Minnie stopped going to the tailor's, glancing occasionally at the neighbor's house. She saw her mother and father, but Anthony was never in sight. Was he sick? Feeling uneasy, she came more and more often to the fence, as if unintentionally, and deliberately spoke louder, so that he would hear and show himself. But a week passed, and he was still nowhere to be seen. I'll go, she decided. So he's not home, replied her mother calmly, chopping carrots. He went away, his brother found a good doctor, he wants to put him on his feet. When did he leave? The daughter looks up with tears in her onion eyes. Well, when, the mother recalled, for about 5 days, early in the morning, I was feeding the chickens, I heard. Why didn't you tell me, whined Minnie. Would have woken me up. And then what? Minnie shrugged. A neighbor is going to the hospital tomorrow, are you going to see her off? The mother asks defiantly. How do I know what's going on with you? Came in to myself, you do not want to tell, I will not insist, only I will not guess. And then for so many days not a word about him at all, as if there was no Anthony. That's what I'm talking about, like a dog in a haystack, I want it, I don't want it. Are onions making you cry, or what? Said Minnie, scrutinizing his face. It's from the onion, she sniffed, and she felt sick to her stomach. She was glad there was hope, only she really wanted to see Anthony. I'm done, she put the unhealthy vegetable aside and washed her face. I'm going outside. Well, go outside, the mother takes a bite of the carrot and crunches it loudly, looking after her daughter. She wipes Minnie's tears away, and they keep rolling, only not from the onions now. She does not know why she is crying, something has come over her, it seems that she will never see Anthony again. It is not good to part, there is a residue on her soul, and so Minnie must find out when she returns. She hears neighbors in the yard talking. Ran down the steps, wiped her face with her apron, and went to where the net was. Hello, she waved to Anthony's mother from behind the fence. Hello, she waved back. So Anthony went into town? Abroad, to another country, the neighbor corrects, and Minnie is even more surprised. God willing, it all works out. There's medication, rehab. Perry will be with him for now. For how long? Minnie tries not to give away her sadness, and the mother ponders. 3 months at least, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, as long as it takes, as long as he gets on his feet, she said and cried. She hid her face in her hands. All right, if I were an old woman, he's so young. You're not old, Minnie disagrees. It breaks my heart to see him, and I pray to God he's a good man. I know, Minnie feels the tears want to flow out again. They say he's the best doctor. He'll get him back on his feet. She shared her hopes, and Minnie wanted to be there for Anthony, supportive and encouraging. Is there any way to call him? She wondered. I only call Perry, lied his mother, whom Anthony had asked not to give the phone. He is adamant that no good will come of such a thing. If the feelings are real, time and distance do not interfere, but if not, we'll forget him quickly, so be it. Say hello to him for me, Minnie said, her voice trembling. All right, the mother nods and leaves. In vain Minnie searches for Anthony on the internet, he wasn't there by that name. Either he'd changed, or he'd never been, and she never asked him about it. She found Perry, but did not write anything. She did not want to go through a third party. It was one thing for the man himself, and another for him. And what would she tell him? I flipped through the profile, and among the other photos was Anthony, and my heart beat faster. Standing on his feet, smiling, hugging his brothers, and somehow it felt good to see him again. She did not know why she had saved the photo on phone. And since then the days dragged on for a long time. She waited for Anthony to come back, but he was gone. She wondered how he was doing, only her neighbor wouldn't say anything. Again, her son forbade it, but Minnie didn't know about it. The policeman never came to see William, which meant they didn't write a report. Apparently the father had a hand in it. It was time to go back to university, and 2 weeks before September, she and her mother went to settle in at the dormitory. She lived here during her freshman year, and would have to live here during her senior year. Someone had been wooed, and now they were moving their things into a room for 3. Minnie sighed as she looked around her new place, but you get used to it. The hardest part was seeing Dwayne, not because of what feelings remained, she was afraid that he wouldn't give her a pass. I had to call him, but he did not answer, and I am sure he did it on purpose. And once again compared him to Anthony, and the memory of him made me smile. I wondered how he was. Does he think of her? It was her father-in-law who helped her to settle the divorce. He was the one Minnie had dialed and asked for help. They had nothing to divide, no children, no property, and that is why the papers were accomplished quickly. The second time they left the courtroom, but this time to go their separate ways. I don't hold it against you, Minnie said, shrugging her shoulders as Dwayne looked down on her haughtily. I'm even glad it happened that way. What's with the cripple with that now? The guy was trying to get a rise out of her. Anthony is his name, Minnie replied calmly, and he's a wonderful man. Used to call me that, Dwayne snickered. Didn't know your rotten nature, live and learn. I wish you happiness. Wish yourself. I think I already have it, Minnie smiled and turned and went on her way while her ex-husband looked after her. Minnie walked happily. Even though summer was coming to an end, she felt like everything was just beginning. She imagined hugging Anthony, talking about how she missed him, worrying about him. And every time her mother called, she asked if her neighbor was back, but the answer was the same, no. It was a little different at the university now. The old company Minnie had spent all her time with had cut her out, because Dwayne was blending in more harmoniously, and as it turned out, friends were exactly his. It didn't take him long to settle down again, and soon the same Cheryl that Minnie had once seen in a picture was settled beside him. The married man could never leave his family, deceiving himself and his future wife, and she realized that it was not right to hang around like this all her life. Well, advice and love, as they say, Minnie chuckled, remembering one of her mother's sayings. Focusing on her studies, Minnie tried to kill time, but her thoughts kept returning to Anthony. In her dorm she met some girls, and one of them offered to read the cards. I don't believe in that, Minnie laughed. Still, let's see, Minnie's new friend squinted, holding out a deck. Take it off. Rolling her eyes, Minnie, to the general laughter in one of the rooms where the 5 girls had gathered, complied with the request. And in front of her, the cards were arranged in a fan, pattern upward. You had a boyfriend once, loved him, see, she pointed to the black 9, but he's in the past now. So everyone knows that, Minnie smiled, shrugging her shoulders. But he will be, the fortune teller laid a few more cards on the right side of the lady. It's not a guy, it's a man, she concluded, looking at the king of clubs. And Minnie got all fit, not believing, but still wanting to hear good things. The road awaits you soon, the meeting long awaited, Minnie interpreted the symbols, not knowing how important it was for Minnie to hear. The girl turned all ears, afraid to miss a word. You'll be shedding tears, the 7 of spades settled next to the others, and Minnie involuntarily recoiled as she stared at the black inverted hearts. There's a king of your life, admit it, she looked up at Minnie with her dark brown eyes inherited from her grandmother. Minnie's friend was said to have gypsy roots, and that was a little frightening, but she was a nice girl. I don't even know, Minnie sighed sadly. Both are and aren't. How's that? They whispered behind me. And the next card lay on top of the others. An execution house, Minnie mouthed. Is it from prison or something? Her friend inquired. No, Minnie shook her head. He's very nice. So there's all kinds of people in there. Yours will be, she said suddenly, keeping her eyes on the girl. And the tears? Asked Minnie. Everybody cries, she gathered her cards, which meant she wouldn't tell Minnie anything else. Believed, then, she smiled slyly. I don't know, Minnie admitted honestly, giving up her seat to the other girl. She couldn't sit still and listen quietly to what the others would say. Not interested, her own destiny was being decided. And so Minnie left the room and called her mother. Hi, how are you? She asks, the question on her tongue. Hi, says her mother, not expecting the question. So, Anthony's on his way, she says into the phone cheerfully. Why mine exhales Minnie's words, and her own hands tremble, her heart beats faster, her thoughts tangle. Finally, at last, he's coming back. How long she's waited for this. Her palms were sweating, the phone was almost slipping out of her hands, and she listened. It's been a long time since her mother listened so intently. So that's all you ask about him? She used to ask about me and father first, but now all she talks about is the Taylors. I don't. They're bringing it in on Saturday, that's what Aunt Shirley says. Just an hour ago I talked to her, so that's the latest news. Saturday, Minnie echoed, counting the 3 days left. So I take it you're expected, too? I don't know, Minnie shyly gives away her joy. Hasn't been to see her mother in weeks, and here she is all at once. She doesn't know, her mother chuckles. You'll be ready to walk, even if the bus breaks down, she says, smiling. The bus didn't break down. Minnie took the last flight on Friday, skipping one of the couples, otherwise there was no way to make it. She stared out the window, clutching her bag, and didn't know what she was going to say to him. Many times she'd gone over the meeting in her head, and now that she was so close, all confused. What was he like? Had he changed? She realized how much she needed him. But what if the breakup was different for him? If he didn't need her at all now? Thoughts ran ahead, and for some reason not the brightest. Her father met her at the bus stop, almost in the same place Dwayne had left her that summer. He hugged her, kissed her, and he reeked of home, of family, and loved ones. As she drove past the Taylors, she glanced casually at the windows, they were dark. Her mother greeted her cheerfully, as always. How good it is that at least something doesn't change in life, her support for Minnie remains one of the most important things. At night she could not sleep a wink. The same painting that had been given to Anthony still hung above the headboard, a reminder of the master. Though everything reminded Minnie of him. She waited until morning, not knowing what time the meeting would take place. She freshened up, lined her eyes to feel more confident, and baked a cake to occupy herself. Her mother watched in silence and understanding. Shirley's out, Mother looked out the window closer to evening, seeing her neighbor. Minnie does not know how to behave. She looks at Anthony's mother outside the gate and goes out to meet her, not sitting around the house. She's standing at the end of the street, wondering when the car will show up. Just go, Dorothy says. Did you come here for nothing? You can't sit still. It's embarrassing. He hasn't seen his mother for so long, and who am I? My daughter, Minnie, replies the mother. All right, let's go together and have a neighborly welcome. Grateful to Minnie's mother, she went outside. But she did not dare go outside the house. Dorothy said hello to Shirley, chatting, and the girl stayed in the yard. Minnie! Shouts her mother, go say hello. Hello, Minnie grows up as if from the ground, and the twilight hides her pouring blush. Hello, the neighbor nods, catching a glimpse of her. What's your gathering here? Looks out the window at Sarah, as if she's just sitting there waiting to get out, as if she doesn't have any business. But the words go unanswered, because a car turns around the corner. The light from the headlights hits her faces, and those who greet her involuntarily cover themselves with their hands. Even in the exam, Minnie wasn't as excited as she is now. Her heart flutters with anticipation, with a kind of fear. Standing, wrapped in her mother's shawl. Finally, Dorothy says, hurrying to the car. The car came to a stop. The passenger door opened first, and a girl got out. She expertly swung the front door open, about to help, while Perry climbed out the other side and stretched, kneading his bones. Shirley jumped up, peering into the interior, illuminated by a light bulb, where Anthony was sitting. Hello, neighbor, Perry called out to Minnie as she walked around the car, and she said hello back. Hello, Dorothy, he addressed his mother. Welcome, Perry. A whole delegation welcome, he didn't hide his sarcasm. So, not strangers, she was not left in the lurch. He understood everything, even Sarah understood what they were lined up for, and so, supporting her face with her fist, she watched the events unfold. Stand back, Perry said calmly to his mother and the girl who were fussing near his brother, and they parted. Minnie stared full-eyed at the girl she was seeing for the first time. Could it be that she was too late? Her heart clenched in fear and disappointment. So much for the promised tears. Yours will be, she recalled her friend's words, there's someone already arrived, probably the bride. She realized what kind of person she lost, and came back. Anthony cautiously climbed out of the car and leaned on his brother, and the girl put a wand in his hand. And Minnie watches with wide-open eyes as Anthony walks slowly one step at a time. Not by himself, supported by his brother, but by his own feet. She presses her palms to her mouth and cries. Tears rolled down her face, whether it was joy that Anthony had succeeded, or from grief that she did not open up to him before, and now she will not meddle in someone else's happiness. She's going back to town tomorrow. And heart is tearing towards him. I want to run up and hold him, to feel his hands on shoulders, his cheek prickly cheek, and let it be that then his face will burn. But she stands there like a stone, looking at the fact that she can hardly take every step, but she does it. Shirley puts her hand on her shoulder, they talk about something, they both cry and hug. Anthony looked up and Minnie was shocked, looking straight at her and silent. Yesterday his mother had told him that the neighbor had come as soon as she heard he was coming back, and the heat was on her. She had not forgotten, it means that they had had a bad parting then, untold. He could hardly wait till morning, and all the way there he was so restless, confused, that even Perry asked him why he was not himself, but he brushed him off, he did not say. Anita had arrived, had left her family behind, and had decided to run to her mother for a few days. She hadn't seen her in a while, was that not an excuse? Well, what next? Mother whispers. Shall I go? I don't feel comfortable myself. We met, but it's not nice to stand staring. I'll come with you, Minnie grabs her sleeve, feeling like a girl of 10, while she and Anthony have a mute conversation. Tomorrow, then, you'll talk, the mother realizes. No, she shakes her head quickly and looks away. I'll leave tomorrow, she whispers. The mother looks, she does not understand anything. But it is not in the street to sort it out. She only shrugged her shoulders and arched her eyebrows in surprise. Hello, Anthony, Dorothy said to him. I'm very happy for you. God willing, you'll be running soon. Thank you, Dorothy, he said, while he kept his eyes on Minnie. It's a lot of work, but I won't be lazy. Won't you be happy for me? The former finally decides to ask Minnie. and she realizes that she looks terribly ridiculous and ugly. "I'm glad," she says softly and sadly, "really, really glad," and a forced smile lights up her face. And as if she were not 20 years old, but 40, and it seems that a deathly fatigue weighs on her shoulders, to escape, to sleep and not think about anything. And I want him and her to rush towards each other, but so many people around. And most of all stops the ignorance of the feelings of the other, the fear of being unwanted and misunderstood. "Will you be here long?" he asks again. "I'm going to town tomorrow," I decide firmly, and he changes his face. So it's not to him, she has deceived her mother, she has reassured her. "Anthony, let's go inside," Shirley fusses, and he stands there, heartbroken, unable to take a step. But not because he physically can't, he wants to see the girl next door, the one who's in his heart. Not a day goes by that he doesn't think about her, doesn't look at her photographs, doesn't dream of holding her in his arms again, so fragile and small that he wants to protect her from everyone. It turns out that some dreams are just dreams. Vaughn even managed to get on his feet, it would seem unreal, but the body gave in, and all because there was faith and hope, good doctors, the desire and desire. He believed that Minnie is waiting, not only for himself, for the beloved impossible done. "Wait," he said rather sharply to his mother. "Anita, get the bag from the car," he turned to his sister. The girl nodded and quickly complied with the request. "Give it to her," he asked, turning away and heading for the wicket, held by his brother. Anita handed Minnie an opaque bag, and in it something hard and long. Minnie stands there batting her eyes, unable to comprehend anything, and the relatives went into the house. "What did you get?" cries Sarah, who is eerily curious. Minnie doesn't answer, but she knows what's inside. She follows her mother into the house on cotton legs while her soul cries quietly. "So what's with the funeral, don't you get it?" covers the door to Dorothy's house. So waited, and how she swallowed her tongue. Standing silent, "I tell you, a dog in a haystack." "He came with his fiancée," Minnie burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "What fiancé?" Her mother looked surprised. Did Anita call a bride? She finally guessed and laughed. "Troy, did you hear that? Calls her husband. She's going to marry her brother and his sister." "With what sister?" didn't understand Minnie. "The younger one," her mother looks at her. "You don't even recognize your neighbors anymore." "Well, she's always been bright." "So what? Like women don't wear makeup or do their hair. Is that why you were standing there like that?" Minnie's sitting there, going over everything in her head. And he asked her when he was going to leave, he wanted to talk to her, and she's got it all in her head. "Show me what's in there?" Mother nods at the bag. And Minnie takes out her portrait carved on a tree, only it's even better than the last one. The mother is surprised, admiring such beauty. "Why, things won't have to be carried far now," she jokes, "over the fence and all right," she smiles. "I'll come to you for salt." "Mom," laughs Minnie through her tears. "Why Mom?" sniffs Dorothy's nose, crying. "He loves you, see how he loves you." Minnie went out on the porch and listened to the neighbors' party. "It's late tonight, we'll have to wait until morning, but sleep is not coming." She opened the window, but it is not summer outside, the coolness of autumn bursts into the room, shakes the curtains, frosted all over. Minnie wrapped up in a blanket, looking at the starry sky. Today she can see almost every star, it's so clear. How many people walk under the same sky, in love, looking at the same sky that was, is, and will be later, but it's all the same. She looks at the neighbor's window, where the light is on, and recoils so that she almost falls. Anthony gets to his window and looks at the one across the street. Why isn't it closed? He sits down on a chair, picks up his guitar and opens the sash of his window. Fingers strumming the strings, and he sits brooding, lost in thought. Shoulders and fingers get cold, a shiver runs down his body with big goosebumps, and Minnie decides it's time to show her face. "Hello, neighbor," she appeared at the window. Anthony froze, and a smile spread across his face. It felt so good to hear her voice, to hear her again. He put the instrument away and lifted his head. "Do you recognize it?" Minnie decided to play, remembering their recent acquaintance. Lucy, he played along, pretending to forget the name. Minnie, the girl corrected him, not hiding a smile. I recognize it, he said differently already, looking into her soul. Are you cold? He nodded at the blanket her roommate covered her head with. A little, she agreed. No one to warm me, she toyed with the man. He devoured her with his eyes, swallowing the excess moisture in his throat. I'd love to do it, but I can't get over the fence, alas. Mischievous lights flickered in her eyes and Minnie, throwing off her blanket, sat down on the windowsill. What if I came? His heart raced blood through his veins, clutching one hand to the chair, he tried to sit up straight without giving away his excitement. Hurry up, neighbor, I'm terribly cold, she admitted. Then come here, he said, not believing she would. Minnie jumped to the ground and looked around. To get to him through the front door would have to go all the way around her house first, out into the street, and then all the way around his house. She didn't want to be spotted, so she skillfully climbed the fence, and quickly overcame the obstacle as she had once done when she was a child. Climbing the ledge of the house, she grasped the windowsill with her hands, intending to climb inside, when someone knocked on the door. Not sleeping, Perry walked in, and Minnie jumped so sharply that she nearly hit her back. Getting ready, Anthony lied. What's your deal with this girl? Love, the man answered somehow calmly, and Minnie was ready to fall through the ground. She's kind of wild, Perry opined. You're wrong, you just don't know her like I do. Yeah. Well, I've known her for 3 weeks less, his brother hissed. Sometimes a couple of hours is enough to understand a person. Perry, I don't have time to talk right now, let's reschedule for tomorrow. All right, he agreed. Let me close the window, it's cold, he walked over to the windowsill, intending to follow the words. No, I'll do it myself, thanks, the other stopped him. Suit yourself. Just turn off the lights, Anthony asked, and his brother complied. Minnie, Anthony stood up and leaned against the windowsill. Are you here? She stood up, not knowing what to say. Did you just tell the truth? She whispered. Why would I lie? His words sounded in the night. I'm not one to throw around pretty phrases, but I'm all for talking about my feelings. You know mine, I'm tired of hiding and forbidding myself to think about the one I need like air. I specifically asked Mother not to tell me how I could be found, to give you a chance to arrange your life without looking back, as if I was never there, but you came back. Why? Minnie stood shivering in the wind, not knowing what made her colder, the fear of opening up or the weather. Come here, he held out his hand, and the girl was in the room. Anthony closed the window and waddled to the bed. Here, he handed her the plaid. I didn't want to, she whispered, touching his arm, and a chill ran through her body in all directions. Come here, he put his arm around her palm, and Minnie sat down beside him. Hold me, the girl said, barely able to make out his face in the darkness. The only lantern near their house was out, the month wasn't too bright, and so it was only possible to distinguish the silhouette of a man in the room. Why? Maybe I'll understand something, she answered in his words. He grabbed her in his arms, and the world exploded with a million pleasures. She had waited so long for this, so long to feel his presence, that she now felt immensely happy. Got what? His hot whisper right in her ear, which made her tingle and feel good all at once. I love you, she said in a hushed voice that was hard for him to hear. What? He interrogated Anthony, though he could make out the words, but he wanted her to repeat it, because it was unprecedented happiness to hear from the lips of someone you love about love. I love you, Minnie said more slowly and quietly, unashamedly. My girl, a sigh of relief burst from Anthony's chest as if a heavy stone had fallen. She could feel his soul weeping, his wings unfolding, sliced by the other, building up their plumage to soar upward and lift the man above all adversity. Isn't that the power of love? I don't know if I can walk, he shared his fears. You can, you surely can, she pressed her nose against his, whispering the words fervently. I'll be there for you, we'll get through this together, I promise, and then you'll climb over the fence to climb through my window. Silly, Anthony grinned. Why would I climb through my window if you were going to be mine? Yours, echoed Minnie. Don't you like it? Like it a lot, a lot. His words caressed her ears. As much as I hate to leave, I have to go. She listened to the voice of reason after a while. I understand, Anthony retorted. Will you leave tomorrow? No, I don't want to, Minnie admitted. I'll stay another week. What about school? How can I think about anything but you right now? I guess I'm being selfish, but damn, how nice that sounds. Minnie ran out of his bedroom and back to her room. She lay smiling for a while longer, shivering from the cold, and then fell asleep after all. The next morning, she was on her way to visit properly, through the front door. Sorted, her mother grinned when they did manage to talk. Yes, Minnie brightened. Mommy, you're the best I've got, she hugged her tightly. You all are, you, Daddy, William. And there is nothing more important to parents than to see a child happy. Sarah looked sly, pouring the liquor into shot glasses. It wasn't often that her friend visited her, once every 6 months. Now, in the spring, Minnie came to visit her briefly. I'm not drinking, Minnie protested. Come on, she smiled, understandingly. So it's a bride and a groom, she shouted almost to the whole street, raising her shot glass. Don't you shout like that, said Minnie in surprise, blushing. They'll know soon enough, anyway, she tried to see her looming belly. I wouldn't notice it, she laughed, patting herself on the belly. You're in your last year at university, aren't you? Yeah. I'll finish in time, and the professors are good, they won't scold me too much, I've earned a little rest over the years. How's your townie? Dwayne, Minnie reminded me. Yeah, Dwayne. It's okay, he's graduating, too. I don't pry into his personal life, but I know he doesn't have a steady woman. Because he's a freak, Sarah blurted out. Sarah, Minnie scolded and laughed. I'm a simple man, what's on my mind goes straight to my ears. And I'm happy for you and Anthony, really. Gee, he turned out to be a real man, she was a little surprised. Or not from him, she squinted. Sarah, stop. Why? Things happen, I was just asking. Where will you live? Here at first, at his parents' house, his mother's to help, and then we decided to move to town. Anthony is doing so well with his work. He's getting portraits commissioned now too, his sister set up a group, so he's got a waiting list of people who want to do it. Fancy, they say. The main thing is to get paid. They do, Minnie laughs, they pay well. Lucky, Sarah shakes her head, a little envious. Who would have thought things would work out so well for them? What about you and Ted? Ah, Sarah waves her hand, drunk again. Kicked him out. Okay, time for me to go, Minnie rises. You just got here. I won't be long. Anthony and I are going to Williams. Okay, Sarah nods, thinking about something. Minnie goes outside, spring is coming, soon the jackets will be off, the buds on the trees are already swelling, in a hurry to open. Anthony is standing nearby, he is already walking, with a stick, of course, but he refuses to help. And Minnie feels warm at once, she can't get enough of her husband of the future. A couple of months passed before they decided to do something, he was so gentle and caring that Minnie cried, and he couldn't understand what he had done wrong and was worried. And Minnie lay on his chest immensely happy and groggy with emotion. And he couldn't get enough of her. As they neared each other, Minnie took Anthony under her arm, and slowly they walked down the street, escorted by the looks of Sarah, who continued to drink alone, and Dorothy's mother, who crossed the children's backs. God willing, everything would be all right. Do you believe in fate? Asked Anthony one day. They sat on a bench, looking up at the star-strewn sky. Summer had surrendered the reins to fall, gaining momentum, but spring was still blooming in both their souls. I guess so, she dug her nose into his neck as his hand gently squeezed her shoulder. The spiritual intimacy that had developed between them had grown into something special, and she wanted to touch this man every minute. A year has passed since their first meeting, and nothing has changed. She feels the same thrill and the same overwhelming need to be near him. I think if it hadn't been for that tree that fell on me, things would have gone differently. I thought life was over. And it turns out it's not, he shares. And in Minnie's mind, the events of the past are replayed. Here's Dwayne leaving her in the driveway, her suffering alone at home, and then he comes to make peace, and who knows how it will end. I don't want to think about it, the girl shakes her head. Push comes to shove, she says suddenly, and a smile can be heard in her voice. Anthony hurries to put her hand on her already big belly, and Minnie guides her palm to where she can feel the little leg. It won't be long before we see our Edwin, she whispers in her ear, and the voice spreads goosebumps over her body, and with it, joy. She can't wait to meet the baby herself, but when she sees the burning eyes of her husband, who is no less happy, she thanks God for what has happened to her. Not with him, you don't say thank you for such a thing, he did the impossible, he came back to life, all because a man of strong spirit. And Minnie realized it was different with Dwayne, like it wasn't real, two teenagers playing family. Now she feels in her place. They'd played a wedding in the summer, only now here, and Minnie involuntarily compared the two to each other. The bride's puffy white dress had been replaced by a creamy, airy one that made the position less conspicuous. The curls and veil scattered over her shoulders had turned into a tight bun framed by pearl beads. The tall white stiletto shoes had given way to light, low-heeled ones. Even the very expression on her face seemed to have changed. Student happiness was being replaced by quiet family comfort. Anthony didn't want a party, sitting in front of everyone, kissing after every bitter. It gave him immense pleasure to touch her lips, only the thing for him was something sacred. Not everyone wants to demonstrate their feelings, happiness loves silence. But he had to give in under the pressure of his mother, who dreamed of a wedding. It is not every day a son gets married. Kyle proposed in the city, he said he would pay for everything, but it is not necessary to Anthony or Minnie. Better here, with their own, and so rented a cafe, where all the festivities took place. Along with the relatives, a few friends of Anthony came, one of whom they took as a witness, but the bride's side was Sarah. That's who kept the party going. And in the evening we couldn't find either a witness, it seems, they decided to continue the party together somewhere. The wedding party was going on, people were dancing, and even Minnie couldn't sit still. Anthony looked at her, not believing to the end that she now belonged only to him. Young people's dance, the toastmaster announced, and some strange lingering silence hung in the air. Minnie turned on her husband and went to him, about to sit beside him, while Anthony's mother tried to get out from behind the table to defuse the situation. "Bride, come on, where are you going?" the toastmaster didn't understand. Minnie smiled and walked over to Anthony while her mother-in-law whispered something in the presenter's ear. So beautiful, so tender, he thought, while his chest was bursting with feelings and drinks, wanting to spin her in his arms. He had worked hard to get where he was now, so he leaned against the table and stood up and gave his hand to his wife. "Don't," she rounded her eyes in horror, seeing what he was willing to do for her. "You want it, don't you?" he asked affectionately. "Don't," she shook her head, and tears of gratitude poured into her eyes. This man is capable of doing crazy things for her. "Come on, this is our day," he grinned, "I want to dance with my wife." His words made everything inside goosebumps and tears rushed out. Minnie quickly wiped them from her face and stood up, realizing that he meant it. And while dozens of eyes watched in amazement as the young ones, holding hands, slowly walked out into the middle, Minnie could feel by the tension in his hand how hard each step was being taken. Anthony looked at the stick clutched in his right hand, contemplating whether to cast it aside. He wanted to squeeze his wife in his arms and circle the hall, oblivious to the others, as if they didn't exist. But he couldn't do that. Minnie shuddered as she heard the wooden cane clatter onto the tile, and in that second a confident hand rested on her waist and a second gently held her palm. The melody that filled the hall reached his ears, but no words ever broke into Anthony's mind because he was completely focused on what he was doing. Shirley, putting a startled hand to her mouth, watched her son and daughter-in-law stomp slowly into place. Dorothy folded her arms as if in prayer, and the rest of the guests looked on in wonder. Minnie tried to catch the pain in any movement, but Anthony tried to smile, flaring his nostrils wide. For Minnie, getting up and making a few movements is easy, but he had to make an incredible effort. He was already on his third lap when suddenly his leg snapped and he almost fell, just in time to be picked up by Minnie. She knew that this could happen at any moment, and so she waited in suspense, knowing that she could only relax when Anthony was seated. A jumped-up Perry helped his brother to the table and sat him down in his chair. "You okay?" He patted him on the shoulder, and he nodded. Turning to his guests, Perry saw that all eyes were fixed on the young man's table. "What aren't we drinking?" he asked cheerfully, trying to ease the tension and draw attention away from his brother, and as the guests turned to their tables, the hall rumbled again. "Anthony," Minnie looked into his eyes. "It's okay, really," he ran his hand over her face. "I love you so much," she pressed against him. "We love you so much," she corrected herself. "Don't you have any pain?" she asked fearfully. "It's nothing," he brushed it off, in searing pain. That evening it was decided to leave the young ones alone in the house, and so Minnie's parents went to their son's house for the night. Anthony was uncomfortable, but Minnie so fervently urged that they should spend the night alone that he had to agree. His house was too crowded tonight, parents, brothers, sisters with families. Even Perry didn't arrive alone. "Well, now you're in my room," Minnie said cryptically, inviting him in. She immediately closed the curtains so they could feel more comfortable. "Why didn't you take it off?" nodded Anthony at the cracked painting above the bed. "There's too much of you in it, I can't," Minnie admitted. "Help me with the dress," she turned to him, setting up the lock. He tugged the doggy, exposing the tanned maiden's back, pulled her to him and hugged her with his eyes closed. "What are you doing?" said Minnie, a little startled. I dived deep for the pearl, holding my breath. It lay at the very bottom of the deep sea, and here I was, holding it in my hands, finally able to exhale with relief and breathe. She hummed and immediately cried, unable to contain the fatigue and feelings that had built up inside her during the day. "Take care of the baby, my joy," he whispered affectionately, covering her face with kisses. The next day the youngsters moved in permanently with their father-in-law and mother-in-law, and they began to get used to each other. One thing Minnie knew for sure was that husband and wife needed to live separately. Of course, no one was hurting her, but she felt uncomfortable, and she had a lot to compare it to. Living in the city was different, she was responsible for everything, and here she didn't even know what to do. "What is it?" remarked Anthony, and Minnie admitted. "I understand it myself," he sighed. "We gotta build a house." And ashamed to admit it, everything he'd earned had gone to medical treatment abroad. Not just his savings. Kyle helped a lot, and Anthony wanted to settle accounts with him. The earnings from the paintings were enough for the wedding and part of the debt, which the older brother did not want to take, but knowing Anthony's character, he had to. They may say that money is evil, but you can't do without it. He'll earn it, his hands will bleed, and the family will be well off. "It's all right, Anthony," his wife tries to reassure him. She realizes herself that the time is now. Why even more soul-searching when they are just starting to live together? She scolds herself that she could not stand it, but a word is not a bird. "It's out." And she told her mother, and she said in response, "Young people today, they want everything at once, they're used to comfort. We lived with my mother-in-law for 5 years before we moved into our own house. I remember it was hard when I would get up at 6 o'clock and go to the stove, put a huge pot on the stove, and then you would have to heat the stove and carry the wood. You cook borscht for the whole family, and there are 4 men and me and my mother-in-law. Tori's brothers were unmarried then, the youngest, plus their father. And feed everybody, and my belly's like this," she points to herself and laughs. "That's what I remember now, but back then I was bitter and crying and dreaming of my own coal, and you had to work for that, so you had to work. We were building little by little, we didn't have everything at once. When my father would get his paycheck or earn some money on the hobbies, we would immediately go to buy bricks and cement, and you know how happy it was. Little by little we built a house. How can it all come at once? We are not millionaires." Minnie sighed, feeling pampered herself, as if she had not grown up in this family. Be patient for a while, her mother encouraged her. We have something with her father, and we'll talk to the matchmakers and see what we can come up with. Mother, Minnie almost cries in shame. That's not why I'm here, she says, wishing she'd just fall off the face of the earth to avoid this conversation. So if not to the loved ones to complain, then to whom, smiles Dorothy, hugging her daughter. I understand everything, come on, don't cry. Soon it was time to go to the city. Minnie was seen in the antenatal clinic. She had already chosen a maternity hospital. A good doctor was found. Few days before the due date remained, but the baby was not in a hurry. It seemed that Anthony was even more worried than the expectant mother. At every breath she takes, hurrying, wondering what's wrong, and Minnie looks at her slightly frightened husband and smiles. He surrounds her with such care, such trepidation. And it gets scary at times. It can't be that good. Ouch, Minnie griped to her stomach on the eve of her departure, feeling the warmth in her chair from the moisture. I think it's started. Dusk was laying outside the window. The asphalt was icy in places outside the city, late fall. Anthony glanced over at his mother. His father would not be able to drive. He could not see well at night. He was afraid to drive himself, especially with his pregnant wife. It was too much responsibility. What if legs failed me at the most important moment? So he called William. Within 15 minutes his brother was at their house, and they loaded into the car. Minnie and Anthony positioned themselves in the back, and William and his mother in front, and the car sped off. Are you in a lot of pain? Her husband asked quietly, and she squeezed his hand, which she just needed right now because the fear was starting to set in. William, you don't speed up too much. Her mother huddled in her chair, peering into the darkness. There's time, isn't there, Minnie? I don't know, she made big eyes, trying to breathe as she'd been taught. Pain and panic were beginning to set in. We'll make it, her mother answered for her, feeling inwardly anxious. She had been in her shoes not so long ago, and now she was taking her daughter to the maternity hospital. Life is fast and fleeting. She remembers clearly how she held them in her arms. Now it's time to bring up a new generation of children. She turned back to see how her daughter was doing, and then turned back to the road. A fleeting glance was enough to understand how much the two love each other, the tenderness with which the son-in-law looks at his wife. At least she had not seen such a thing in Dwayne. The car skidded sideways so that the passengers were jammed to the right, and Dorothy banged her head on the door, but William immediately leveled the vehicle. Stop, he asked frightenedly to his mother. Fine, she retorted, rubbing her head. Be careful. She shifted her eyebrows, imagining how it might have ended if her son hadn't been a good driver. The four of them walked into the emergency room, Minnie immediately taken upstairs, and Anthony was unstoppable. Begged, persuaded, and the laboring woman in no way wanted to let go of his hand. After the examination, it was decided. We'll have to do a C-section, the doctor informed him, hypoxia. Something serious? Wait here, he pointed Anthony to the bench between the doors, they'll tell you everything later. Anthony stared at the door without taking his eyes off it. Time seemed to stop, just as his heart lurched in his chest waiting for news. He listened to the sounds, afraid to hear the pain in Minnie's screams, though he knew with his mind that it couldn't be avoided. Then here they came, but it was quiet, and then a nurse showed up with something in her hands. Are you Daddy? She asked with a smile. Anthony didn't realize right away that the damsel was holding out a red-faced miracle to him. Got a phone? Let me take a picture, she grinned, handing over the pile for a moment. Anthony was afraid to stand up, staring full-eye at the wrinkled face of the new man, who was a few minutes old at most. That's it, she put the gadget down on the bench. Son, by the way, the girl said as if she'd been remonstrating, and Anthony replied. Thank you. She expertly accepted the child and carried him into the next room. Anthony sat and looked after the nurse, not fully understanding what had happened. Just now he was holding his son in his arms. Thank you, he said again, this time thanking God who had not forgotten him, giving him one miracle after another. The ability to walk, the love of a beautiful woman and a child. Perhaps one of the most unprecedented miracles on earth is the birth of a new life. Just one cell is capable of turning into a human being. He closed his eyes and lowered his head, feeling the happiness flooding inside. It filled him, coursing through his veins, reaching even the remotest corners, until it manifested itself as a single tear in the corner of his eye, and if Minnie had been there at that moment, he couldn't help himself. "You go home," the second nurse appeared, "they won't let you see the laborer anyway. She'll call me later when she comes to her senses." "How is she?" asked Anthony with both words and eyes. "She'll be fine," the woman nodded and ran off. "I didn't want to leave, but rules are rules." Anthony went downstairs, and the mother exhaled freely upon hearing the news of her daughter and grandson. "He looks just like you," she regarded the photo, never failing to smile. "Mom, they all look like each other," William laughed. "Congratulations," he shook hands with the newly minted father. Nothing you men don't understand, but after looking at Anthony, changed her mind, not all. With a son, she hugged her son-in-law fervently. He was the exact opposite of the first. Dorothy kept her distance with Dwayne, as if he were of a different kind, and this one was his own. "I'll call my father," William trailed off. "I'll never hurt her," the boy looked straight into his mother-in-law's eyes. "I know, Anthony, I know," she nodded. "Well, here's another one nestled in." A few years ago, her heart wasn't in place, waddling, but now it's as if it's calmed down. "I can see that you love." "Is it so noticeable?" "There's no shame in loving your wife. Now call your parents, share our joy with them." Minnie remembers through the fog how the baby was put to her. The spinal anesthesia didn't fully work. She had to resort to another, and so, her consciousness dredged up into reality and was carried away on the acid train through the colorful locations. When she regained consciousness, she found herself in the intensive care unit, from which she was fairly quickly transferred to the general ward. She would never forget the first time she took the baby in her arms, experiencing inexplicable feelings, how she held him to her chest, listening to the little button nose noisily drawing in air. She's a mother now forever, and that's another thing that ties her and Anthony together. When she came out of the maternity hospital, she didn't even think they'd come to meet her in 3 cars. Surprised and delighted, she accepted congratulations and flowers while her husband looked at her and the baby with loving eyes. And as they crossed the threshold of the house, Anthony whispered, "At last you are near me," and she realized how much she had missed him. The baby was restless, crying and screaming all the time, and Minnie realized that it would not have been easy without the help of her mother-in-law and mother. No one was saying it was impossible, everyone was coping, but they were there for her during the hardest times, and Minnie didn't want to run away anymore. Gratefully accepting help, she learned to be a good mother. Anthony worked hard, but spent all his free time with his family, and 6 months later a big order came his way. "Gotta go to town," he decided. "There's a new church being built, lots of work, but they promised good pay, too." "The church?" "The sponsors are good, there's money." "You can stay here if you want," he said, wishing she hadn't said yes. "I don't know how often I can spend time with you." "We're family," she replied calmly. "And we'll follow you wherever you say. But you'll be alone most of the day." "But the night will be mine alone," she whispered to him, and desire instantly pierced Anthony's body. "That's enough already." They found an apartment fairly quickly, loaded everything they needed for the first time into their cars, and went to settle in. The parents even held a housewarming party, though they did without the cat. And life began, once again, in a new way. Minnie was now the mistress of everything, but she didn't complain. She was able to get things done in time to meet her beloved husband in the evening. The workshop was nearby, and Minnie sometimes went there, but she tried not to distract Anthony, who was completely absorbed in carving, especially since he was in a hurry to place an order. The summer was blazing hot, dropping only a little in the evening, and so one day when Anthony joined his wife in a park near where they were renting an apartment, the present met the past. "Would you like some ice cream?" turned to her husband Minnie. He started to walk up, but she stopped him. "I'll take a walk," she pressed gently against his cheek, giving him a kiss. "I'll choose it myself, I'm better at it." They both knew why she did it, but they never said it out loud. "And you stay with your son," she stepped away from the playground, waving her hand. Edwin was asleep in the stroller, arms and legs spread, and his sweat-wet hair stuck to his forehead and the back of his head. "Minnie," someone's voice called out to her, and the girl turned around. The smile slowly slid off her face as she realized that Dwayne was in front of her. She immediately tensed, anticipating how this encounter might end. Throwing a fleeting glance at the playground, where Anthony was left with the stroller, Minnie swallowed nervously, trying not to give away her excitement. It was a good thing her husband was correcting something at her son's side at that moment. "Hi," she said. "Hello." "I'm in a hurry." She wanted to turn away to leave. "Wait," he grabbed the girl's wrist, and she had to stop. She didn't want Anthony to see him, so she said, "No time," and pulling her arm back, she hurried so fast that it seemed as if they were not together. Her steps were sprawling, big. She preferred leisurely walks to this semblance of running, but now she was in a hurry to hide as quickly as possible around the corner. "Minnie," he caught up with her and grabbed her arm again. "Don't be childish. Are you still offended or something?" "Absolutely not," she finally managed to stop herself. "I should say thank you," she shrugged, realizing that she felt absolutely nothing for this man. Although, no, she had a grudge against him. "You look nice," he tried to be polite, only Minnie didn't understand exactly what he wanted from her. "I'm expected," she said honestly. "Who?" "Close people." She wasn't ashamed of Anthony, she just didn't want her and Dwayne to see each other. "You haven't even changed," he said as if he hadn't heard, looking at her short dress over a figure that had hardly suffered since birth, quickly returning to normal, though not without effort. "Look, we're not having a reunion here," Minnie tried to escape. "Why don't we sit down and chat? I'm curious to hear how you're doing." "Haven't you heard?" "I'm expected," Minnie wondered at his sassiness. "Why don't you call and tell him you met an old friend?" "Who?" The girl rounded her eyes. "A friend," she almost choked on the word. "You don't need an enemy with a friend like that." Angry after all, he squinted, and Minnie realized that Dwayne hadn't changed either, though it had only been a couple of years. No wonder. "I just don't have anything to talk to you about," she shrugged. And before, he raised his eyebrows. "Do you understand the word no?" "No," he mocked her. The girl glanced at her hand. There was no ring. In divorce, he showed his hand closer, noticing her curiosity. "Cheryl was a mistake. Sorry, didn't realize it right away. Things were much better with you and me. Interested?" "No," she shook her head, showing her own, and a haughty, smug smile slid off the guy's face. "I'm insanely happy and don't need friends like that." "Is that him?" frowned Dwayne, assuming he knew her husband. "Who is he?" asked Minnie, knowing the answer. "The cripple." The word cut her hearing for the second time. Her eyes narrowed, poured with anger, and her brain gave the order to her hand. A resounding slap pierced the evening twilight, and some of the passers-by turned on the odd couple. She didn't wait, she had nothing to talk about with someone who insulted her husband. Turning around, Minnie headed confidently toward the store. Her mind was jumbled, so she grabbed the first ice cream she could find and paid for it. Pretending to study the assortment in the window, she procrastinated to avoid bumping into him again, hoping her ex clearly understood her intentions. But it was time to go back. She exited the store and looked around, no Dwayne in sight, so Minnie hurried to her husband, intending to get him out of here as quickly as possible. Her heart kept pounding frantically in her chest. The encounter didn't leave her indifferent. There was some residue on her soul again. "Shall we go?" She turned to Anthony. "Let's stay here a little longer, I want to get some air." She sat down on the bench and held out an ice cream to Anthony. The movements were somehow abrupt, twitchy. He was so used to her that he noticed the slightest change in her mood. "Is something wrong?" He watched her nervously open the package. "No, why would there be?" Her voice was as cold as icy sweetness. She didn't immediately manage to separate the two sides to pull out a chocolate cone, and Anthony shifted his gaze, discerning a male figure heading in their direction. He'd seen this man once before, only what did he want now? Minnie takes a bite of her ice cream, nervously twitching her leg, seeming not to notice anything around her, and Anthony gets up, leaving his dessert on the bench. Where are you going? The girl doesn't understand, and he's already taking a few steps toward Dwayne. Minnie jumped up from her seat, intending to intervene, but Anthony, extending an arm, stopped her. The baby, as if sensing something wrong, began to grunt, and the mother had to attend to him. She rocked the stroller, turning it knowingly away from Dwayne. Here come the closest ones, he blurted out in a smile, as if he'd met some old acquaintances. What do you want? Asked Anthony quietly, clutching his cane in his right hand. Coming, I see you're not you. Not us, Anthony shook his head. You've changed since the last time we met, Dwayne nodded at his feet. And you haven't. Still the same, he didn't go on, but it was clear without words what Anthony meant. So you're the husband now? Dwayne, go away, Minnie voiced. We're just chatting, he gave a casual look. Husband now and forever, Anthony chided. Let's go, Minnie took a few steps with the stroller, feeling the tension hanging in the air. Dwayne was browbeating the family with his eyes. Leaving his wife by the side of the road, he felt some regret as he looked at her in the rearview mirror, but Cheryl had made him quickly happy that day. Then his mother dragged him to the country, and with each passing month he caught himself thinking he missed Minnie. And she no longer seemed so gray, simple, and today, seeing her blooming, he remembered the old days, and it rolled over. She had traded him, handsome, healthy, with money for the man next door. What did she see in him? A kid, too. He never avenged himself the day her brother smashed his face, her father flatly refused to take him to the police, and he should have punished them. It felt like he wasn't the one who'd abandoned her, but his, which made her feel nasty and disgusting. Have a good day, he nodded toward Dwayne Anthony, intending to walk past. So what, it's better with a limp, Dwayne tried to hurt the family, knowing that the words would hurt both of them. It hurt him that Minnie hadn't even suffered, but had easily forgotten him and was happy now, while his life wasn't adding up, choking with anger. He wanted to drag these happy people along with him, too. They were so happy he couldn't look at them. Anthony, Minnie grabbed her husband's elbow. You can see he's provoking on purpose, don't. Let's go home, she said more affectionately. Anthony clenched his teeth, stepping aside slightly to still walk past. You do everything as she says, don't you? Dwayne couldn't calm down. He knew he was wrong himself, but he was so carried along he couldn't stop. He wanted to blow off steam, he wanted to punch whoever had taken his wife, and it didn't matter that he'd left her on the dusty road first, it didn't count, he'd come back then. Anthony, Minnie pleaded, pulling him by the elbow. He's not worth it. He's nobody, you know, that's why he's mad. Dwayne laughed something of a feigned laugh. That's not what you used to say, you said you loved him. Maybe you lied to this one about everlasting love, too. He was absolutely wrong. Dwayne himself realized it, but I can't stop. The main thing was not the truth, he just had to piss off his husband, because he could not hit the invalid first. Strange nobility, nonetheless. His fists were ready to respond at any moment. Minnie twitched, intending to punch her ex-husband, but Anthony beat her to it. With all the anger and justice in his fist, he punched it into the offender's left cheekbone. Dwayne's head tilted back slightly, but immediately returned to its original position, highlighted by a contemptuous smile. Finally, he had the right to respond. A single wave of his hand was enough to bring Anthony to the ground. Gad. Minnie lunged at him with her fists, shoving him in the chest, and he hovered over her victoriously, looking down at the man lying on the ground. What? No answer, teased Dwayne Anthony, who was trying to get up. He felt like a hero, putting aside the fact that their position was not the same. Find someone to fight with, she bit her tongue in time, realizing she had almost insulted her husband. Go away, Minnie shouted, almost crying with resentment as he invaded her life again, leaving tears behind him. She rushed to help her husband, but Anthony pushed her away for some reason. No, don't, she shook her head, but the man could not do otherwise. He got up and walked again toward his opponent, so close that their eyes were on the same level. He swung and struck Dwayne again in the jaw. He took a few steps back, but held his ground. "Rotten bastard," he lunged at Anthony, knocking him down again. "Help," yelled Minnie, grabbing her head in terror. She dragged Dwayne on top of her, realizing that any movement could prove fatal to Anthony. Two young boys jumped up and pulled the fighting men apart. Dwayne's chest was heaving, and Anthony lay on the ground with his face twisted in pain. "Man, can you get up?" One of the guys leaned toward him. Minnie was instantly on the ground, not knowing what to do or how to help. "Should we call an ambulance?" the guy suggested, and Anthony didn't even mind, and Minnie's heart snapped with fear. She turned around, but Dwayne wasn't around. He'd fled as soon as he realized he might have caused the tragedy. His bravado suddenly evaporated, giving way to his instinct for self-preservation. He ran around the corner and looked out, not knowing what he wanted more, to make his rival get up or never get up again. Realizing that with a bad outcome he would still be found, he pulled out his phone and dialed his mother. "Hi," he tried to calm his breathing. "I've been thinking and decided to go." He crossed the road as he approached the car. "That's good, Dwayne," she glowered, showing her father that her son agreed. "Any way you want it, you can always come back." After parting ways with Minnie, it was as if a bad streak had fallen upon Dwayne. Not only was there no luck in his personal life, he couldn't find a job either. 1 month here, 2 months there, and in fact, nobody needed him. Uncle offered him a job, but it was 1,500 kilometers away, so Dwayne did not want to go. Now the incentive was there, and he hurried home to gather what he needed to leave as soon as possible. To start his life with a new leaf, leaving this town and its people behind. The ambulance was in no hurry to go. Edwin was awake and crying in the stroller, and Minnie couldn't find room, torn between her son and her husband. It was time to feed the baby, but not here in the street. "Anthony," she leaned again toward her husband, who tried to get up. "You lie down," the boy insisted. "Let the doctors have a better look, in case there's something wrong." He saw a cane lying nearby. "Whose is that?" he did not understand. "My husband's," Minnie said, almost crying, and the boys looked at each other in surprise. "Where did he go?" one asked the other about Dwayne. "How should I know?" the other shrugged. "Last thing to hit one of those," he nodded at the stick. Edwin cried in the stroller, building up the girl's already pent-up panic. "Calm the baby down," Anthony finally said, and there was pain in his voice, so hoarse and strained were the words he uttered. Minnie pulled the crying, flushed baby out and began rocking him in her arms. Stepping away from the streetlights into the shade, she cradled the baby to her chest, covering herself with her handkerchief, watching the boys stationed next to Anthony, trying to talk to him about something. Frightened, she fulfilled the role of mother while her husband squirmed in pain on the ground, waiting for help, and on the bench of forgotten ice cream cried sweet sweat on the ground. When the ambulance did arrive, they examined Anthony and decided to take him to the hospital. "I'm in," rushed Minnie, who was shaking from the experience and what was yet to come. "Girl, where are you going with the baby?" The paramedic stopped her as the driver opened the doors and the two guys helped put the gurney inside. "Go home, he'll call you later. Don't you have a phone?" "There is," Minnie nodded, holding tightly to the stroller with her hands. "Anthony," she called out to him, peering inside, but the driver pulled her aside, slamming the doors. "What's wrong with him?" "The hospital will take care of it." The girl sat down next to the chauffeur. "We'll walk you home." The guys looked at each other, in case that man is around here somewhere. Tears of helplessness came to eyes. To be with him, to hold his hand, to support him, to tell him that everything will be all right, that's where she should be, and who knows who needs her more right now, her husband or the baby. She looked into the stroller, where two gray eyes, Edwin's from her father, were staring at her, for Minnie's were green. The car moved, and Minnie stood still, staring after her. "Girl," one of the boys touched her gingerly by the shoulder, "let's go." Minnie nodded and, turning the stroller around, hurried home. She realized only now that she didn't even know the hospital where her husband had been taken. So confused, she didn't ask. Calm down, she said to herself, everything will be fine, it must be. But Anthony's face and legs, lying in an uncomfortable position, stood before her eyes. I need him anyway, nothing matters, just him. Who was that? The guy decided to pry. What? Minnie didn't immediately realize they were addressing her. The man who hit your husband. Do you know him? Minnie nodded, but she was hovering in her thoughts, and the guys decided there were enough questions. Thanks, it's this way. She stopped outside the entryway, opening the intercom with her chip. The guy held the door until Minnie moved in with the stroller, then handed over the cane he'd been carrying all along. Are you sure you're okay? They asked just in case. Thank you so much, Minnie thanked again and headed back to her place. She needed to make an urgent phone call, and she dialed her husband several times, but the phone never came up. She just couldn't leave the baby, who had to be washed and changed, so she got busy with the baby, not stopping to think about how Anthony was doing. Mom, she almost shouted into the phone when Dorothy called, Anthony is in the hospital. What's wrong? The mother asked calmly, so as not to startle her daughter, who already sounded frightened by her reaction while her heart pounded in her chest. It's Dwayne, Minnie cried into the phone, he beat up Anthony. What? The mother wondered, no longer able to contain her emotions. Scoundrel, scoundrel, she scolded her former son-in-law. Mommy, I'm so scared, Minnie paced from one corner of the room to the other, glancing at her son lying in his crib. He was trying to get up and grab onto the edge, just like his father had done an hour ago, and Minnie's heart ached again. Are you home? Yeah. I got escorted out by some guys, and they helped break them up. I don't know where the ambulance took him. Calm down, her mother tried to influence her from afar, realizing that words were unlikely to help. She glanced at her watch, realizing she shouldn't be driving into the night. Listen, now you're going to put the baby down, calm down. Because the milk might break, remember, you don't belong to yourself now, you belong to your son first, and so think of him. He's little, he needs your protection. Tomorrow morning William and I will be at your place. I won't take father to look after the household, and I don't want to say anything too much, you know. It may be all right, she understood what made Minnie so frightened, what probability there was. Let them not talk about it, but it was obvious without words. I don't know how to call his mother. It's wiser in the morning, Dorothy retorted. You shouldn't tell them today, you don't know the news yourself, as soon as anything is clear, then. Is he alive? Yes, of course, it's the other thing, she stammered, getting to that point. I know what you mean, her mother retorted. There's nothing you can do anyway, I'll pray, he hears everything, and he'll hear me, and you go to sleep. How can I? I have to. If you get any news, call me anytime. That's it, I'll see you tomorrow, and she hung up. Anthony called a little later, when he got settled in the room. Told her exactly where, said nothing more about himself. I'll be there, Anthony, I'll be there tomorrow, she said confusedly. Are you all right? Yes, don't worry about that, at home. I love you, Anthony, so much. She felt guilty about what had happened, about how he seemed to have closed himself off from her. See you tomorrow, and the phone went silent. She pulled the phone away from her ear and sank tiredly in the sofa beside her son. Let's go to sleep, Edwin, she addressed him affectionately, we'll go to Daddy's tomorrow. She took him in her arms and rocked him until the baby was asleep. They parted again in need, and the bed seemed as cold and alien as the walls, which until recently had been home. If Dwayne started stalking them, it wouldn't end well. She would go to the police, she would make him leave her family alone. Before, she couldn't even imagine that he was capable of such a thing, hitting a person with a disability, but he did it. And, curled up in her pillow, she cried out what was still left inside. Her mother arrived as promised, and Minnie was grateful to both her and her brother. I'll find him and Dash, but William didn't finish, his mother interrupted him. Let's not threaten, that's not what's important right now. They walked into the emergency room, as they had done about 6 months before, only then Minnie was the culprit on a good occasion. Now it was different. Give Edwin to me, we'll stay here, you go in first, Grandma accepted her grandson, and Minnie pushed the right room. There were 4 beds in all, 3 of which were occupied. Minnie nodded to the patients and stopped beside her husband. Anthony lay on the bed pale and lost. "Hi," Minnie said hello, smiling. She walked over to her husband, leaning in for a kiss. He was looking somewhere sideways with a detached gaze. "I was so worried," she leaned her forehead against his. "Why aren't you talking?" He sighed heavily, and yet he looked into her eyes, and she read the desperation in his gaze. "Edwin's there with Mom," she decided to change the direction of the conversation somehow abruptly. "Can I get it?" "Wait," he took his wife's hand, and her skin responded with goosebumps. "I'm afraid I have some bad news." "Hello," the doctor entered the room. "How are you feeling?" he addressed Anthony. "Fine." "Okay, it's too early to talk about anything right now, no prognosis, but I don't pass sentences on anyone." "Tests ordered, nothing more to say for now," he winked at Minnie and moved on to the next patient. "I'll never leave you," she whispered hotly in his ear, snuggling. "We can do it all, we did it once, and now we'll get through it. Just don't give up, Anthony, do you hear?" He stroked her hair, and it was unclear who was comforting and encouraging who at that moment, but her closeness now made her want to fight for her happiness and do the impossible. "Why didn't you listen to me?" Her heart clenched in pity. "Why didn't we just leave? This could have been avoided." Only he would have done that, and the next time he and his family were humiliated, no man could walk by and not respond. "I couldn't have it any other way," he said, as if overhearing her words, and Minnie knew he was telling the truth. The job had to be abandoned. The customer demanded a clear deadline and was not prepared to wait for the foreman, so Minnie had to adjust everything with Perry's help. He arrived as soon as he heard the news, handed over the finished work, took what he had earned and removed the tools from the workshop that Anthony was renting. Anthony didn't want to talk about what had happened, though his brother insisted on filing a police report. What was it, nobility or stupidity? Perry couldn't answer. Neither could Anthony. Perhaps he, too, wanted to respond to his abuser in a manly manner. He'd been used since childhood to stick up for himself and his loved ones without passing the buck. Perry shook his head, but made up his mind. He didn't start the conversation again. And again rehabilitation, which Anthony took up with double persistence. He could not let his family down, his wife, his son. What hope and support was he if he could not walk? The goal was distant and seemingly unattainable, but he did not give up. That fleeting mood, when he found himself on the ground under the weight of his opponent, and remained lying there, feeling it hard to move his legs, introduced apathy. It was as if he had returned to that fateful day when a heavy tree had split his life in two, forcing him to do the impossible. And so he could not look his wife in the eye, struggling with his inner demons urging him to give up. Weaknesses pass, and so he gathered his courage and decided to fight. His mother-in-law looked at Minnie reproachfully as she found out exactly what had happened. He decided that himself. Perry cooled her ardor. Talking to him. "Stay out of this, Mother, they have a family of their own, he's a man, he's a protector, it's not a woman's job to protect her family." "Perry, what if I don't know, Mother. Honor means a lot to Anthony. He's strong, he'll pull through." Edwin was growing and happy, mother and mother-in-law rotating weeks at a time so that Minnie had a chance to visit her husband and handle things. She sensed her mother-in-law's mute displeasure and soon brought her out in conversation, after which both cried and hugged, realizing that they had grief in common. Back in the village, Minnie and Anthony settled into the cottage nearby, which their parents had bought together. Anthony scolded, saying he couldn't accept such a gift, and Minnie stood bewildered, not knowing how to thank her for such a thing. "It's small, but it's your own. You'll get comfortable, you'll make a home, and we're nothing if not family, who's going to help?" Anthony walked with difficulty. Minnie watched her husband shuffle from foot to foot and wanted to help. Only after a couple of such attempts, when he looked at her angrily, she never looked up again, trying not to look in his direction and do anything. "Don't," he said a little softer, realizing how wrong he was. His hand rested on the girl's shoulder, and Minnie covered his palm with hers. We'll manage, she turned to him. Shifted on the bridge of her eyebrows betrayed pity. He sighed, realizing that these were only words. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't do more this time. Work to do, he turned away and waddled to the workshop. There were many orders, one of the sisters was to be thanked for that. Family ties mean a lot. The Taylors didn't leave each other in the lurch, helping as much as they could. Anthony shut himself in more and more often and came out of the workshop rather tipsy. Minnie didn't tell her family at first, believing they could handle it, only moments like this kept recurring. She watched as he slowly dug himself a hole that would be hard to get out of. Perry had called her more and more since then. He was worried about his brother. She couldn't stand it, cried and told her what was going on outside the walls of their little paradise. You have no right to leave him, he tensed somehow. I don't want to, but I don't know how much longer I can take it. I understand, Perry sighed. I'll talk to him. 2 weeks later, everyone gathered at the wedding. Perry was saying goodbye to freedom. Anthony didn't want to go, but convinced he just couldn't ignore his own brother. Here's this shirt to put on and pants, Minnie fussed, ironing things. Remember our wedding? He looked at her somehow warmly and smiled. You were the most beautiful bride. Why was I? She grinned, settling into her husband's lap. Her arms encircled his neck gently, caressing his skin with her fingertips. You're mine, she whispered, moving closer to his lips and kissing him reverently, as if for the first time. In a way that made the world flip inside, as if his guts had been squeezed, twisted, and now they were unfolding slowly, coming to their senses. I'd forgotten how good it felt, his mind raced, and he squeezed her as tightly as he could. You'll choke her, she said huffily and laughed. So gentle, so kind, so airy. Anthony, she suddenly changed her face, how can I help you? He was silent, pondering her words, not because there was a way out, he just didn't know how to answer. It's hard for me, she sighed, turning away. I don't feel needed. It's like everything we've been through is for nothing. Only it's not. There's you, she put her hand on his chest, me, she took his palm and put it on her heart area, and Edwin. We're family, you know? If it's bad for me, you'll do everything possible and impossible, so why doesn't it work that way for you? I'm a man, he pulled his hand away from her heart. A real man, she agreed, otherwise I wouldn't have chosen you, and again that look that throws me into heat. What is he doing with their lives? She needs him so much. You are my husband, and I will follow you wherever you say, but not like this, she shook her head, this is no way out. These are steps toward the abyss, and I will not drag Edwin there. For a while they looked at each other in silence. Pack, she stood up, putting the essentials for the girl in her purse. Anthony watched his wife fidget and became ashamed of the moments of weakness he had begun to allow himself in the evenings. She didn't swear or shout, just stared sadly, and that look of hers tore at his gut, scratching his ribs and squeezing his heart. Only every time a wave of despair came over him, he uncorked the bottle and wanted, just for a split second, to forget what he was now. 1, 2, 3 shots allowed him to blur reality, to drown out the pain and disappointment. Only he's not a wimp, he's a father and a husband with a family behind him. Come here, he suddenly wanted to hug her again and breathe in the scent of her skin. How could he forget everything? How could he allow himself to do this to someone who was there for both sorrow and joy? What? Minnie turned, clasping one of her earrings. I won't hurt you again, he made a promise to himself in front of her. I believe you, she whispered in his ear, kissing his lobe. The wedding was lavish and fun. Edwin was left with Dorothy, a long drive, and such a celebration was not for a young child. Congratulations, Minnie hugged Perry as the newlyweds accepted congratulations. I'll talk to him, he whispered to her. Don't, she smiled back. We've made up our minds. Great. By the way, I found him. Who? Minnie rounded her eyes, realizing she was about to hear a familiar name. You know, Perry nodded, and Minnie grew uneasy, he's alive, but not very well. But why would you do that? She couldn't understand. It's my brother, I couldn't have it any other way, and Minnie was forced out by other guests. Dwayne waited for news from home, but every time he called his mother, he received no news. Finally, he was able to relax and forget about the incident when two men picked him up outside the house. Dwayne, great, one of them called out to him, and when the guy turned around, there were two strangers near him. Holding their hands in the pockets of their leather jackets, they were for some reason wearing sunglasses, even though it was already quite dark outside. Where are you from? But he couldn't finish his sentence when he felt his breath hit his solar plexus. Quiet, the guy grabbed him by the shoulder, keeping him from falling. Let's take a little ride. Unbeknownst to him, a car came from nowhere, and Dwayne found himself in the back seat next to one of the strangers. Now you show us how to punch, grinned the one sitting next to him. I can answer that, sure can, and all three of them laughed out loud, laughing at a joke that didn't seem at all funny to Dwayne. He realized that these men were not mistaken. It was not the police who had come for him, as he had expected, but the men in black. The wedding sang and danced, and Minnie could not forget what Perry had said. Did she feel better after what he said? Hardly. She wanted him out of their lives forever, but Dwayne kept invading her again and again. She didn't wish him any harm. Angry, hated, despised, yes. But she didn't want revenge, just to forget and blot it out, and she almost succeeded. Only after this information her soul was out of place again. She didn't want to be the cause of someone else's grief. Perry, let's step back for a minute. She still caught her fiancé's eye to clear it all up for herself. Don't be so right, Minnie, he laughed. I can't do that. Her thoughts tormented her. Hang in the hospital and that's all, he soothed. Legs, she was terrified to hear it. As bad a man as Dwayne was, he didn't deserve this. They're intact, Perry rolled his eyes. I don't get it, are you worried about your husband or this horrible man? Other people's grief won't help us, Perry, it will only drag us down. I'll feel guilty all my life. He didn't think of that when he hit my brother. But I'm different. Anthony and I are different. I'm sure he wouldn't want that. No man in the world would have wished Anthony such a fate. Have you told him? Perry shook his head. He knew himself that his brother wouldn't pat him on the head, and so he didn't even discuss it with him. You know I'll do what I can for Anthony, but I'll look back all the time. Just getting his face cleaned, he said contemptuously, it'll get better fast. Thank you, a sigh of relief escaped Minnie's chest. You're a good brother, she smiled at him. In the evening, when Minnie and Anthony were placed in one of the rooms of the apartment, they remembered for the first time in a while what it was like to give each other physical happiness. They lay listening to their own hearts tapping out after pleasure, and Anthony interrupted the silence. I want a daughter. What? Minnie raised up on her elbow. I'll have two beauties, he kissed his wife on the nose. I don't even know, the girl hesitated. You don't need to know, just come here. Once again he pulled her to him, feeling what a pleasure it was to be with someone who gave him goosebumps and took his breath away. Anthony was falling in love with his wife once again.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new